Buenas noches, damas y caballeros, y bienvenidos a la clase de español en casa. Esta noche vamos a aprender algo nuevo. Es un poco difícil, pero si prestan atención, no será problema. Esta noche vamos a aprender de los verbos reflexivos. In English, they're called reflexive verbs. You probably haven't really discussed reflexive verbs in your English class. This is something very peculiar to Latin-based languages. So let's start with a real quick idea of some of the terms that we need to understand. Step one, way back in Spanish 1, you learned what an infinitive verb is. We can use any infinitive verb. I'm going to use lavar. We know that lavar means to wash. You could use escribir, you could use estudiar, you could use leer and comer. It doesn't matter. We're just going to start with the verb lavar. Now, lavar was used last year with washing the car, lavar el coche, washing the dishes, lavar los platos. We also need to understand what a conjugative verb is. You know, of course, when you take lavar and you break it down into the 5 different subjects, I wash, you wash, he washes, we wash, and they wash, it looks something like this. Yo lavo, tú lavas, él lava, nosotros lavamos, and ellos lavan. We can start with this because we're going to move on from just the simple verb lavar, because the reflexive verb changes from lavar to lavarse. Now, it looks a little funky, but it still has the verb lavar as part of the word. So whatever we did to lavar, the non-reflexive, is still going to happen with lavar. with lavarse. The difference is that little thing at the end there, the word se. That is called a reflexive pronoun. I'll explain a little bit more about those later on. But again, lavar was used with things like lavar el coche and lavar los platos. Unfortunately, lavarse is not used with lavar el coche and lavar los platos. Lavarse is used when you wash part of you. For example, washing your hands, washing your hair, washing your face. So let's get rid of lavar for a moment. We're going to take a look at lavarse. Step 1, we still have to be able to conjugate that verb lavar. And we know how to conjugate lavar. We just put it in the yo form, the tú form, the el form, the nosotros form, and the ellos form. That hasn't changed. What's going to change is what we do with that little reflexive pronoun at the end. What you need to know is that reflexive pronoun does 2 things. Number 1, it's going to change slightly depending on who is doing the washing. Number 2, it's going to go in front of the conjugated verb. So let's take a look at this. In the yo form, we know that I wash is lavo, but that means I'm washing something else. I'm washing the dog, I'm washing the dishes, I'm washing my car. In order to say I'm washing part of me, that se is going to change to me. Me lavo literally means I'm washing me. I'm washing part of myself. So I'm going to be using that if I'm going to wash any part of me. If you're washing any part of you, or if I'm going to say that you're washing your face or you're washing your hands, that se is going to change to te. And again, it goes right in front of the conjugated verb. The el en usted form, he washes his hands, he washes his hair. The se stays se, but it goes in front. Look at it this way. It's one less word to memorize. You've already seen the lavar se, now you just use it again. Nosotros changes to nos. Nos lavamos means we're washing part of ourselves. And ellos, ellas and ustedes, they wash and you all wash. It again stays the word se. So you notice that third person, the el and the ellos, it stayed se. So as we conjugate it, we're looking at these reflexive pronouns. Me, te, se, nos, and se. That's what you need to memorize. Which one of those words goes with the verb? So looking again at lavarse, we have lavar. We know that lavar is going to conjugate, and when we conjugate it in the yo form, it becomes lavo. So yo form is me lavo, tú form is te lavas, el form is se lava, nosotros would be nos lavamos, and ellos, ellas, and ustedes is se lavan. So whatever we did to lavar before it was a reflexive verb last year, we're still doing the same thing. We're just using these reflexive pronouns, me, te, se, nos, and se. Some people have a hard time with this, so think of it this way. Think of them as reflective pronouns, because these words literally reflect back on who is doing the action. I'm washing me, you're washing you, we are washing ourselves. Sometimes that's helpful. So let's take a look at what we've just looked at here. Reflexive verbs versus non-reflexive verbs. We started with lavar, and we know that means to wash. Wash the car, for example. Well, the reflexive verb lavarse is when you wash part of yourself. So let's take a look at some of the new vocabulary we're going to have in the new chapter. If you don't recognize it right away, don't worry, we're going to go over this in the next several days in class. So another reflexive or non-reflexive verb is afeitar, which means to shave. Now non-reflexive, that means the barber shaves the man's face. But if I shave my face, or you're shaving your face, or she is shaving her legs, we need to take afeitar and change it to afeitarse. Another example, cepillar. Cepillar means to brush. And you use cepillar if you brush the dog, or you brush somebody else's hair. If you brush your hair, that you now need to use cepillarse. So these verbs mean the exact same thing in the non-reflexive form as well as the reflexive form. But if you do it to yourself, or he does it to himself, you have to use the reflexive form. This is not my rule, this is Spanish. Now, let's take a look at another classification of reflexive verbs. This one's going to be a little bit more problematic because some of these you've already learned in a non-reflexive way, but when you make them reflexive, it actually means something completely different, or sort of. For example, levantar. You learn levantar pesas, to lift weights. Okay, no problem. Well, you don't literally pick yourself up. You don't grab yourself and pick yourself up off the floor. We use that as a terminology. Everyone says, come on, pick yourself up and go. But when we look at levantarse, it literally means to get up. You are lifting yourself in a figurative way. So it means to get up, to stand up, to get out of bed. Any action of getting yourself on your feet, that is levantarse versus levantar. I hope that's obvious. So let's take a look once again at lavarse. We have these reflexive verbs like me lavo, te lava, se lava, nos lavamos, se lavan. Okay, we've seen that before. We're left with these pronouns, reflexive pronouns. Me, te, se, nos, and se. Again, I told you that's what we need to memorize. We can plug any of our reflexive verbs into this little formula, such as levantar, and we can conjugate now levantar, because it's a regular air verb, and we put it the same place we put lavar. Now we have me levanto, te levantas, se levanta, nos levantamos, and se levantan. As soon as we put that me, te, se, nos, and se in front of the verb, we're no longer talking about lifting weights or lifting a dish or lifting a brick. We're lifting ourselves. We're standing up. We're getting up. Okay, so we're almost done here. Let's take a look at, for example, lavarse, levantarse, afeitarse, and cepillarse. That's what I've shown you thus far. This chapter, we're going to get a lot more of the new reflexive verbs. Now, it looks like an awful lot, but basically it's just a list of vocabulary. I will consider this to be the most important list of vocabulary for Spanish too. Don't get overwhelmed by it. It's just something we're going to have to take day by day, and you will eventually get used to these. It's not going to be terrible, promise. Okay, so let's get back to these reflexive verbs. We know it's a reflexive pronoun plus a verb. Reflexive pronouns are always going to be me, te, se, nos, and se, and we can put that with any verb such as lavar. Now, let's do this in the yo form. So if we conjugate yo form of lavar, we know that that changes to lavo. But we don't want to deal with lavar. We want to deal with lavarse. So we do the same thing. The yo form of lavarse, we take lavarse. We know we still have to conjugate the verb lavar. So we'll just drop the se for a moment. The yo form of lavar is lavo. But to make it reflexive, we need one of those reflexive pronouns. Me, te, se, nos, or se. Do you know which one it is? If you said me, you were correct. So where does the me go? If you said it goes in front of lavo, you are correct. Me lavo means I'm washing, and it's inferred that I'm washing part of me. Washing my face, washing my hands, washing my hair. This brings us to a couple of the most important things we need to understand about reflexive verbs. Once you've memorized what the reflexive pronouns are and you've memorized the vocabulary, we have to apply two grammatical rules. I've been giving you placement rule number 1 throughout this presentation. Throughout this year, we're going to learn 5 different placement rules. This chapter, we only need to know 2. So, placement rule number 1. Reflexive pronouns go in front of a conjugated verb. That's what you've seen over and over again, so it's nothing new. For example, if we wanted to take afeitarse, to shave, we know that we have to conjugate afeitar. It's a regular AR verb, and that se is going to change, but it goes in front of the conjugated verbs. So we say me afeito, te afeitas, se afeita, nos afeitamos, and se afeitan. For I'm shaving, you're shaving, he shaves, we shave, they shave. Very straightforward. But did you notice something about the infinitive verb, afeitarse? That reflexive pronoun is not in front of anything. It's actually right there attached to afeitar. That brings us to placement rule number 2. Reflexive pronouns may be attached to an infinitive verb. A basic premise of a sentence is that every sentence will have a conjugated verb. So placement rule number 1 will always apply. Not every sentence has an infinitive. But if a sentence does have an infinitive, you actually have a choice. You can put it in front of the conjugated verb, follow rule number 1, or you may attach it as in rule number 2. So let's change I shave to I'm going to shave. Simple translation is voy a afeitar. Now, alone like it is right now, you're telling somebody I'm going to shave somebody else, or I'm going to shave the dog, or whatever it was that you're going to shave. If we want to say I'm going to shave my face, I'm going to shave me, I need one of the reflexive pronouns. So let's follow reflexive pronoun rule number 1, put it in front of the conjugated verb. Do you recognize which one of these words is conjugated? If you said boy, you are correct. So I can put that me right there in front of boy. Now, me voy a afeitar means I'm going to shave, and everybody understands that I'm going to shave my face. But if I follow reflexive pronoun placement rule number 2, I can attach it to afeitar. So when I said me voy a afeitar, I could also say voy a afeitarme. They mean the exact same thing. There's no difference whatsoever. One doesn't mean, or one is not more used than the other. It just exists. I will say I hear this form a little bit more often than the other, but there's no rule for it. So let's try one more. Instead of I'm going to shave, I'm going to say you have to shave. Notice I changed I to you, and instead of I'm going to, I changed it to you have to. So, tienes que afeitar, once again, that would be interpreted as you're going to shave, you have to shave somebody else. I want you to say that you have to shave, like your face is all scraggly, okay, you have to shave. Or whatever it was that you're going to shave on your body. So now I need the appropriate reflexive pronoun. It's in the tu form, so that means I'm going to use te. And if I follow placement rule number 1, it goes in front of tienes, because that's the conjugated verb. So te tienes que afeitar means you have to shave. But placement rule number 2 states that I can attach it to afeitar, and I can say tienes que afeitarte. Means the exact same thing. Might sound a little complicated, but I think you might have this by now. And just to show, let's do a little quick quiz. I wash my hands. We're going to use lavarse once again. So I'm going to give you 4 choices. How do we conjugate I wash my hands? Is it lavarse las manos, lavome las manos, me lavo las manos, or me lavarse las manos? Well, we look at I wash my hands, and I don't see an infinitive verb. So any place you see lavar, that can't exist. So lavarse las manos, that even doesn't exist. I will say that's a pretty common mistake, because people just say, oh, the yo form, put an O at the end and I'm good. You can't do that, because lavarse contains 2 things. So A is not correct. If you look at D, it also says me lavarse las manos. Yeah, it doesn't work either. So now we're left with either B or C. Lavome las manos or me lavo las manos. I have I wash as lavo. I have me both times. Well, if you looked at placement rule number 1, it must go in front of the conjugated verb. Look at B, lavome. I attached it to the conjugated verb. That does not exist. So C, me lavo las manos, is the correct answer for I wash my hands. Let's try one more. I want to wash my hands. Still using lavarse. Okay, give you 4 choices. How do we say I want to wash my hands? Notice I want is quiero. I see quiero in all 4 of these sentences, so we're good. I also see to wash in English. Well, look at D. Me quiero lavo. That means I want I wash. Well, I want to translate to wash, so D doesn't work at all. So now I'm left with quiero me lavar las manos, me quiero lavar las manos, and quiero lavarme las manos. If you're a little confused, again, think of the pronoun placement rules. In front of a conjugated verb or attached to an infinitive. Look at A. Where did I put the word me? I put it after a conjugated and before an infinitive. That breaks both rule number 1 and rule number 2. So that leaves me with B and C. Which is the right answer? Did you recognize that it's a trick question? They are both correct. They both mean I want to wash my hands. B follows placement rule number 1. C follows placement rule number 2. If any of this is confusing, we'll practice this week. Now, I want you to watch this video, Reflex the Verbi. And don't worry if you cannot actually connect through this presentation. I will upload a link onto School Loop, and I want you guys to watch this. And please be prepared to practice the reflexive verbs in class tomorrow. Buenas noches a todos y buena suerte.